Look around and you see a world made of discrete things: people, chairs, trees, atoms. Our baseline assumption is that reality is a collection of self-contained objects occasionally bumping into one another. But consider what happens when you look at a forest. You don't actually see a forest. You see individual pines and oaks, and you notice the space between them. The relational whole, the deep ecological web tying the soil to the canopy, is invisible to the eye. You only see the parts. The same thing happens when you listen to a string quartet. If you focus solely on the cello or track the exact pitch of the first violin, you lose the music. The music isn't stored inside the instruments or the individual notes. It exists entirely in the invisible relationship between them. This is the articulation paradox. The very act of perceiving forces us to adopt a specific perspective, and that perspective automatically acts as a filter. It requires us to carve connected, relational wholes into isolated fragments just to make sense of them. This perceptual filter is locked in place by the language we use every day. Western thought is built on a grammar that demands a subject, a verb, and an object. We are trained to name things first and then describe how those things interact. The laws of classical logic, formulated by thinkers like Aristotle, require strict, stable definitions. To make sense of the world, early philosophers carved it into fixed categories, treating reality as a catalog of static substances. Later thinkers like Descartes built a wall between the observer and the observed. We started assuming that every action requires an independent agent performing it. Because our sentences require a subject, we added a doer to the deed just to satisfy our sentence structure. This reliance on nouns turns a living, fluid process into a collection of separate objects. When the structure of our language demands a thing for every action, we begin to mistake our own labels for the reality they were meant to describe. This habit of breaking things apart scales all the way up to the scientific method. We rely on compositional explanation, the strategy of understanding complex systems by dissecting them into their smallest pieces. This method provides incredible precision. It allows us to predict an electron's magnetic behavior to 12 decimal places and synchronize satellites with atomic vibrations. This grid illustrates how that success happens. Science excels at creating highly stable jurisdictions, controlled environments where variables are isolated. Within these boundaries, definitions hold steady, and objects behave as if they are self-standing. The risk is that we take this localized success as proof that our reductionist map is a complete match for reality. We treat a highly controlled, bounded jurisdiction as if it covers the entire landscape of existence. The cracks in this model appear when we reach boundaries that refuse to be carved into distinct, independent parts. In quantum entanglement, measuring one particle instantaneously determines its partner, regardless of distance. The relationship precedes the particles. Similarly, mapping every firing neuron fails to explain the subjective experience of a memory. Awareness is a relational whole that resists being summed up as physical pieces. This is what some researchers call the blind spot. The scientific framework relies on objectifying the world into measurable quantities, yet it struggles to account for the subjective, relational experience that allows us to do science in the first place. These persistent gaps suggest that our current models may be reaching a jurisdictional limit. By treating the mathematical map as the territory itself, we risk overlooking the relational ocean that the isolated data points fail to capture. Relational ontology offers a different perspective. It suggests that reality is a web, where the connections actually create the objects, rather than the other way around. Consider the difference between sitting in a waiting room and being in love. In a room, you and the chairs are separate entities, merely sharing a space. This matches our standard model of reality. But being in love is an immersive state. The relationship constitutes who you are in that moment. You cannot break that bond down into separate traits or logical reasons without losing the very thing you are trying to describe. If reality is fundamentally relational, our noun-heavy language behaves like a net with holes too large to catch it. The moment we try to define it, we sever the connections that make it whole. Recognizing this does not require us to abandon science or logic. It just means seeing them as tools with specific limits, rather than ultimate truth. The poet Robert Frost captured this beautifully. We dance round in a ring and suppose, but the secret sits in the middle and knows. Our definitions are the supposing. Our direct, participatory engagement is the actual knowing. At this scale, reality reveals itself as an active, unfolding verb. To understand it, we must shift our focus away from the isolated pieces and learn to participate in the living relationship.